Everyone, good evening, good evening, good evening. Everyone's getting on real quick tonight. Good evening, good evening. Y'all, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Woke Wednesdays. We do this every single Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Hurston Sanchez. I'm a third-year doctoral student at Florida International University. They're trying to get rid of me. And this is the person who's trying to get rid of me. And tonight we're going to talk about
something called graduation. That when we admit a student, we actually hope for that they graduate. But it turns out that occasionally a student doesn't want to graduate.
And it happens. But this is not the case. But thank you all so much for tuning in tonight. Tonight on the show, we have someone who I admire very much, my mentor, my professor, dissertation chair, a man who is absolutely amazing, Dr. Benjamin Baez. Would you like to introduce yourself to the people who you are?
I'm Benjamin Baez. I am a professor of higher education at Florida International University. And yes, that's what I do.
So we have a lot of people saying hello. We have Christyville saying hi, Jay Boogie saying what's up,
Hey.
Andres. Justin
Hey,
Taylor
Andres.
just joined. So we got a lot of people tuning in tonight.
Our Justin.
Our Justin. So thank y'all so much for tuning in tonight. Tonight we're talking about poverty. I think this is a very a topic that a lot of us talk about sometimes, using different language at times. And last week I made a post about poverty, and I said that poverty is a type of systemic oppression. And a lot of people were saying that poverty is a choice, that if you just pick yourself up by your bootstraps, show some grit, you'd be okay. And you know what? I think this is our next topic for Woke Wednesdays. And I asked a person who I believe is very knowledgeable on the topic to kind of come out, hang out with us. And thank you so much. I know you've had a long day, so I appreciate you hanging out with us for a little bit. Real quick, we have a lot of people saying hello. Macam Mex saying hello. Dr. Jim Bird saying I'm watching you. It's a little creepy. D Classy, aka the Fanaticon.
So we like Jim.
So Dr. Bob, let's talk a little bit about yourself, like 2 minutes. Tonight we're talking about poverty, systemic oppression. You grew up poor. You're not supposed to have a Juris Doctorate, a PhD, a bachelor. You're not supposed to have these things.
I do have all those things. So yeah, we grew up poor. We got my mother. My mother left my father. I'm gonna say in the middle of the night, but it's actually more in the middle of the day because my father was a musician, so he played at night, and my mother left him in the middle of the day, but middle of the night kind of argument. And she took us. She had 4 children. She took us. And
Were you in Puerto Rico at the time?
yes, we were in Puerto. I was born in Puerto Rico and in Santurce, Puerto Rico. And my mother escaped my father, who was abusive to her and us, mostly to her. And she escaped him, and then I don't know how she got us out, but she got us out of Puerto Rico. We came to New York City, to the Bronx, and she stayed with my aunt, who already had 8 children, and then my mother came in with added 4 in a 3-bedroom apartment, and we just
In the Bronx,
South Bronx, and
so that's 1970s.
yeah.
Bronx.
So then my mother got welfare to be able to, get her on her feet, because at the time in New York City, welfare was trying to help people. It's trying to help people. It wasn't trying to hurt people, like it has been now, especially under Clinton, the husband, where it became about welfare became kind of a disease. Well, it actually started before that, but he confirmed that argument. So, but my mother got welfare, and then she got a series of jobs after that. So we were always scrounging around. We were poor. We didn't have enough money to subsist. I think poverty is not having enough money to be able to subsist. And
so can you break that down a little bit? Because a lot of people tend to think of poverty in a type of way. Hey, you know what? I can't buy this TV, so I'm poor. I can't go on vacation, so I'm poor. So you're saying that poverty is not having the means to subsist.
I don't believe poverty is a state of mind. It is an inability to have enough income to subsist in a humane way. So, I mean, the fact that somebody may be deeply in debt with a 4-bedroom mansion, who cannot take vacations in Paris, may feel poor. But to me, poverty is not a state of mind. It is a systemic inability to have enough income to subsist, to be able to know where your next meal is coming from, to have shelter, to be able to go to a doctor when you're sick. Those are things. If you're not able to do that, I think you are poor. It has nothing to do with your mind or with your beliefs or the fact that you feel poor because you don't have what your neighbors have. In the sense that if your neighbors are able to eat and you cannot eat, then you don't have what your neighbors have, which is the ability to eat, then I think you are poor. So poverty is a state of being unable to have enough income to subsist. And that's every day. So some of us may feel like we lost our jobs today, and then today we can't pay our bills. But if there's a way of getting yourself out of it, then I think you may be poor in a moment. But poverty is a systemic inability to have the money to subsist.
So
and
real
by
quick,
subsist is to be able to get those things that were required to just be alive and being like food and shelter and healthcare, and also if you have a family, to provide for them. And we live in a society where you're supposed to have a family. Not having a family is considered abnormal, and therefore, if you have a family and you're not able to subsist for them, you're not able to provide them the necessary comfort of being able to know that they're not going to have a meal only on Tuesday, then you are poor. And now I use poverty in the sense of an economic condition of being able to have enough money to subsist. There may be the notion of poor as a kind of cultural argument that relates to a lot of things. It may be that you're poor in your arguments, or you may be poor in your attire. Like you have the poor I call myself as having a very elitist, but I have a poor mentality, meaning like I'm still save. I still feel like
you drive a Toyota.
I believe, I drive a Toyota because I don't think that I'm not like a thing, but I do like Scotch, so I don't have my term. So my point is that there's a notion of class that is not covered by the notion of poverty. Poverty is an economic condition of being systemically unable to have the means for your subsistence. Poverty or poorness can also be a notion of class in which it's a social disposition towards wanting certain things and stuff like that. So we can talk about both. I don't know which one you are.
So Dr. Baez, real quick, because we have a couple people commenting. People are saying that they agree that it's a systemic issue. Jay Boogie saying poverty is embedded into the migrant experience, and many people fail to realize that. I 100% agree. It is a forced systemic oppression. Jazz John, real quick, let me just read it and then we can. Do you feel that some middle class families are actually living in poverty because some of them cannot afford health care or food after paying their core bills, but they make too much income to be on welfare? Just some questions that are going on. But real quick, I was wondering if you could. So we tend to use this.
You don't want me to respond to any of those?
Yeah, but real quick.
Okay.
Systemic is a word that we tend to kind of use, throw around, right? Especially academics in the academy. If you had to give us like just a quick definition of what systemic means.
It means that it's more than one person. It's systemic, meaning it is pervasive in a society. So like we think of a system, think about like what does it mean to say that we live in a system? A system entails, it's beyond any, yes, there's individual components, but a system is something that organizes an entire is bounded in a particular way. So to say systemic, it's just not me that is unable to have my subsistence. It's a systemic issue, meaning like it's reproduced over time. It has different parts of it that support it. If you think about systemic as being a word that arises out of the word system, then you're thinking of more than one
Multiple
thing.
multiple.
Yes. So systemic means that this is a everyday experience. So if one day I don't have enough money to buy something, I'm not so sure that is systemic. When my whole life is constantly being able to buy something, then I'm looking at a systemic. Now, when you look at that among multiple individuals, then you look at a systemic system in a society, right? So it repeats itself for more than one instance. Does that?
No, yeah,
That's my
I
understanding.
think that's very helpful. I think it's very helpful because I think that's one of those terms that's hard to define. A lot of people tend to traffic in this language, but they rarely define it, right?
It's hard to define because the way that our concepts in the world don't allow us to think this. We tend to individualize problems, or I call this the distinction between a subjective and an objective phenomenon. Am I?
Yeah,
I
you're
don't want to be
good.
too
No,
heady,
you're
because I
good.
tend to be very
You're good.
heady.
No, yeah. I'll ask
cerebral.
questions. Go ahead.
So the notion of a subjective phenomena, it's like it's a state of mind issue. So, for example, discrimination, as a subjective phenomenon, to argue for discrimination as subjective means that somebody must intend to do it and somebody must feel it happened to them. It's in the mind. It's a subjective.
Can you give us an
phenomenon.
example?
So the idea of, let's say, discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
So to argue for discrimination in law, that I was discriminated against because, say, I was a Puerto Rican gay man. Just mentioning an example of someone I don't know. If I feel discriminated against, the law requires that I prove that somebody intended to discriminate against me and that I felt discriminated against, right? An objective phenomenon is that my intentions are irrelevant. There are certain ways in which we organize our world and the certain kind of normative assumptions, the things we take for granted, that systemically, more than one person and over time, reproduce discrimination. So that an objective phenomenon, it doesn't require the psychological states of individuals are not relevant to an objective phenomenon of discrimination, is that statistics show that consistently and over time we have a repeated pattern of some people being marginalized over others. That is an objective phenomenon. We use statistics or objective kinds of knowledge to prove that point. The law used to recognize objective phenomenon, but now the conservatives that have now taken over course have defined discrimination entirely as subjective. So it means you need a fucking fucking tape to prove of someone saying I hate black people to say that to prove discrimination, and the black people have to know that tape happened. It's like,
and even when the tape is out there, it might not even be provable, right?
And we've seen that with Black Lives, with the police stuff. Like even police shooting people in it, it's still not proof because you can't prove that the police intended. They were doing it because they knew you were black and whatever. Even though, anyway, you get the point.
So that's a subjective thing. Yeah. So
it's treated subjectively rather than objectively. That we're seeing this repeated pattern over time, and that we're training police to be suspicious of certain people over time. So it's not like, it may be that they don't actually hate black people, but they have the normative assumptions about black people. Is like, I'm using the example of police killings, which is a very harsh example.
But it's a very real example too.
But it may explain why juries don't understand this argument. They're not being required to look at this objectively. They're looked at it requiring subjectively. So that means you have to know the police officer. You have to know what their backgrounds are. You have to know what their beliefs are. Did they join the Ku Klux Klan? By the way, a lot of them do. That's the point. Anyway, whatever.
So y'all, clearly we're saying a lot tonight. So please feel free. I see a lot of new people online tonight. Please feel free to ask questions, post comments. Clearly, Dr. Baez can handle any argument that you throw his way.
Unless it's about emotions.
Unless if there are crying emojis, so I'll let you know if they come your way.
I don't know what that is.
So listen, all right. So I think poverty is embedded into the migrant experience, and many people fail to realize that. I 100% agree that it is for systemic oppression.
So migrants, the terminology means, if it means like people migrating, there's a lot of, like, for example, urban professionals, which white young professionals are migrating back to these cities. I don't think we're talking about them. So we may be talking about some, like, an immigrant kind of experience.
Undocumented immigrants.
Yeah, I would agree that my argument works for that. But so the term, we have some migrants that come, or not migrants, or immigrants that come to the United States that are accepted. They're welcomed. They're not from shithole countries.
Yeah.
You know, those are welcome here. They're incorporated here. They're assumed to be qualified, so they're giving jobs. all this stuff, right? And then there are some that are inherently not ever qualified, and they're here illegally just because they look like they're here illegally. And
you talked about how when you go to Arizona, right? SB 1070 is
I have to carry my passport
where you
when I
can
go to
racially
Arizona,
profile someone who looks undocumented. In North Carolina, a Puerto Rican man who was also differently abled was deported to Mexico. In 2009, a Puerto Rican man was an American citizen.
Georgia deported a Puerto Rican back to Mexico.
Yeah, North Carolina too. It's a southern thing.
So the migrant, if you're talking about migrancy, which I'm a migrant, I define the word migrant versus immigrant. Migrant is within a nation. So the English migrating to Northern Ireland is migrancy. Puerto Ricans coming to the U.S., despite the fact that a lot of you think they're outsiders, they're actually American citizens. They're migrating to the U.S. So it's within nation population movements. Their population, it's not like, hey, I'm bringing my mom over. No, it's population movements, right? So it's masses of people moving to a place. It's called migrancy. Or I don't know, migrancy, is that a word? I don't know.
But it's interesting because a lot of people
versus immigrant, which is someone coming from outside the nation state and seeking citizenship into that, or not seeking citizenship, but they're coming into. So if we're talking about migrancy or migrant, the argument is about migrant that I'm hearing in my mind.
Yeah.
Within nation movements, and then it reminds me of nobody ever calls the suburban. There's actually a migrant movement of wealthy whites, suburbians moving back into the urban cities and gentrifying it and whatever. That's happening all over the U.S.
But no one calls them migrants.
I mean, migrants.
Even globally, right? Because we see affluent whites coming into Latin American countries, the Caribbean, and
see, I would call that immigrants. And so the immigrants went out of nation.
So Dr. Byers, we have a lot of questions, and I want to get to all of them. Jazzy John is asking, do you feel that some middle-class families are actually living in poverty because some of them cannot afford health care or food after paying their core bills, but they make too much income to be on welfare?
Okay, so it hinges on what we mean by the word middle class. So if you cannot afford health care, then you are in a perpetual state of not being able to have to meet the needs for your subsistence. Subsistence requires that you be able to go to work in a world that requires you to go to work. There are some Middle Eastern nations where you don't have to go to work. But the point is that you go to work and you're able to do so. And healthcare to me is a basic human right. So if you cannot do that, then yes, you are in the world where you don't have enough means to meet your subsistence. And so I would be on the camp of people who would say you're in a state of poverty, even though that may be offensive to the people who get called that. If you cannot have health care, then you don't have the means, you don't have all the means for the necessary things that you need to be able to have a job, to be a so-called productive citizen. So I guess I'm going to support that statement.
So we have another question. Yeah. Jay Burns is asking, how ubiquitous...
Jim Burns?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Jim.
How ubiquitous is the culture, in quotes, culture of poverty discourse? How ubiquitous is the culture of poverty discourse? I'm thinking of the current right, but also Clinton's welfare reform and the Moynihan report.
How pervasive is that?
How ubiquitous? So ubiquitous means how common everywhere.
Common, as well as this idea that there's a culture of poverty that is inherent to the individual, right?
Can you break down what the culture of poverty is a little bit?
Okay, so I don't know what Jim means because he's more into this literature than I am. But I understand the cultural poverty argument to be this Moynihan, Daniel Patrick Moynihan did this idea about there becomes poverty begets a cultural understanding of yourself as always inherently poor, and
real quick, begets means like to reproduce, right? To
if you read the Bible, beget.
Yeah, go create offspring.
Yeah, if you're a Christian, which some of you may say not all of us are.
Oh, we have an interesting question from a student organization.
Okay,
but go ahead.
But the idea is that the cultural poverty myth is that poor people are. This gets perpetuated time that the reason you're poor is because there's no motivation to become poor. That you just begin to think that you're
lazy.
need a handout. You're lazy, stuff like that. It's entirely pervasive in all political discourse, not just Clinton. Although Clinton makes it normal because that's a Democrat. And we can actually question the right as saying we believe what you believe that, but when somebody like Clinton basically, and I'm talking about Hillary Clinton, we never had a chance to know what she had to say, but I'm not sure that it was going in the right direction. And by the way, I don't want to get into an argument about that. But the point is that Bill Clinton was actually a very problematic president because he was able to say to Democrats this kind of language about, you have to pick yourself up. Example, Bill Clinton defended affirmative action, but he didn't defend affirmative action because he believed it was a moral obligation to fix past wrongs. He argued that affirmative action is important because you have a global workforce and you need people to be able to deal with global, diversity, right? So he believed in affirmative action for that particular reason. He didn't have so Bill Clinton's arguments were always these like amoral, and I don't mean like he's an immoral person, but these kind of economistic arguments about things. So he had this argument about poverty that somehow you should be getting to work, and if you're poor, it's because you haven't had the right skills, you don't believe you can make it. All this bullshit.
Yeah.
Which it's not like a poor person's gonna go, okay, I'm gonna change my attitude and whatever, and then a person's gonna go, you changed your attitude, come on in. That's not how this fucking shit works. It's like it's not like a poor person can just magically change the world. They have to be accepted. They have to be accepted. They have to be hired. They have to be whatever. Which is why like the idea of like an African American or Latino person can't get a job. It's like it's not on them. They can't get a job because they can't get hired, and so the hiring process is the one that should be questioned. And so I think this is the same argument that I don't know if this is what Jim means, but this is how I want to answer it because that's how I'm hearing it. So I don't know if Jim, this is what you mean.
So we have another question from an amazing organization on campus at FIU, anti-capitalist organization called One Struggle. They're asking. Now I know you don't want to talk about capitalism.
Yeah, why not?
But they said, ask him if he agrees that capitalism is the major cause of poverty. If he does, could he elaborate on it?
Yes, I believe that capitalism is the major, because capitalism is based on the idea that somebody can own the means for somebody's labor. If you are able to own the means of another person's ability to subsist, then that's what capitalism. That's one of the things that capitalism is. It's also based on the notion of private property, and we can go into that. So I believe that capitalism does two things. One, it gives control over someone's subsistence to another person, who can give good wages or not, or can deny the wages or not. The person owns another person's ability to survive, to subsist. But it works at an ideological level.
What do you mean by that?
It works at I was going to add. It works at an ideological level, meaning that in order for this to work, because the capitalists are a smaller group of people than the people that are controlled by capitalists, that you have to have certain ideological things that people have to buy into or accept. And one of them is the idea that, for example, the Christian ethic of you suffer on earth and you get your rewards in heaven is something the capitalists were able to use effectively to say that, whatever. So because you're supposed to suffer on earth and your rewards come in heaven, you suffer and then you get your rewards later, which is a highly convenient argument for capitalists. And I think it's actually bullshit, because that assumes that God is hateful on earth.
We don't talk about religion on the show. We don't like to talk about controversial things on Woke Wednesdays.
Okay, that's good to know that that's what you agree with. But it's irrelevant to me. And so the second thing is, so I think it works at the analytical level. Or the idea that hard work is what gets you success, rather than the fact that your boss controls what you do. And so I believe that Marx's arguments are correct in that way.
So real quick, and I'm gonna give you a break so you can have a glass of wine, because I know you've been
I'm thirsty.
He's thirsty. So I have real quick. If someone wanted to, so you're talking about a lot of you're using a lot of kind of like.
Did I deal with the
yeah, and yo, one struggle. Please let us know. I can definitely introduce you. Amazing Carla, I love her. This 20-year-old from Brazil, absolutely
Shout out.
Brilliant.
I don't know what the word is. Woke.
Okay, that's about okay. Leave that to me. One struggle. Please let us know. Everyone, please let us know if we answered your questions. I see a lot of new people on the show. Please feel free to post your comments, ask questions. If you disagree, let us know why, and we'll be more than happy to address your concerns.
Email me with your questions, and I will have him answer them.
Yeah, I'm.
Because he's my student.
Yeah, that's what we do.
I gotta be exploitive as well.
Yes, exploit. But so if someone wanted to kind of learn about this a little bit more, can you just? I know this is a weird question. Can you just provide like some quick like text? I know you're a big fan of Wikipedia.
Oh yeah,
you're a big fan of Wikipedia.
Is okay. I think Wikipedia is like the greatest invention ever. And one of the things that Wikipedia does, is kind of democratic. Anybody can edit. And as a result, a lot of mistakes happen, which are actually have been productive. I believe like common sense are things that needs to be questioned. And so there's something about Wikipedia that academics hate, especially academics hate, because they cannot control it's not a peer-reviewed, meaning like the experts decide what is the truth of the matter. Something about Wikipedia that is just so democratic that anyone can fucking put anything up there. I love it. I love it.
So they want to learn a little bit more about capitalism and stuff.
Well, I think the Wikipedia piece on capitalism is actually not bad. Read Marx. Read in education, because I'm in education, the work of McLaren and Giroux.
Peter McLaren, Henry Giroux. Yeah, I'll type these names in. Peter McLaren.
Marx's arguments are like, that's where you go for understanding this argument. I think there's some interesting
YouTube videos are also extremely, I think, insightful and helpful.
I guess some of this is undecipherable for the ordinary American citizen, because a lot of these works are written for academics, and it's been the work of these activists that have brought some of this work into the sort of
the masses.
Yeah. Well, the world of living, which is academic is a world of living, but it's a specific world of living. But then there's other worlds of living, and some of these people are bringing these concepts into the other worlds of living.
Yeah.
And one of the so I would say that there's some economists that I think are good ones, like Sen. I mean, there's a lot. I don't know. I guess
I can email that out to you as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide it. But really, the Wikipedia piece is like you mentioned that, and I think that's not a bad start for some of these arguments about capitalism. But capitalism is a system in which private property is protected, and also the right of someone to control the means of another person's labor. So like, if someone has to work for a living, somebody controls the means for that, and that is a capitalist system. Versus a socialist system in which there's no private property, everything is owned in common, and that is a socialist system. And that is a system in which everybody, it's not like the people don't have money or whatever, it's just that nobody owns, no specific person owns the means of another person's ability to subsist. And that is a socialist system.
All right, Tobias. I got it. All right, so let me ask you some more questions. All right, let me give you a wine break. See, that's the way you have to convince Dr.
So
Tobias.
I take a wine break on call, or can I take a wine break You guys tell me. I mean, you
So
guys
no,
see a lot of stuff
and that's why,
happening on his phone.
and that's why you know,
If I didn't agree that I needed a wine break, I would
Host
be object to
duties.
this being told how to.
These are called host duties.
Alright, go
Power.
ask a question.
No power. All right.
I can walk out.
Stop. Don't embarrass me. All right. Mario saying preach.
Mario
LOL.
who?
Mario, the one who lives next to me.
Oh, he's so far away right now. So I just want to say, hey Mario, over there in Finland. Hi. Oh, he's over there.
All right. So look. So that's the bias. So let me throw a wrench in here. All right. Let me throw a wrench.
I don't know.
So let me.
Where's the wrench? Like,
It's a tool.
like
It's
a
a tool.
screwdriver?
It's a tool. It's a tool.
All right.
So you grew up poor. You're talking about you had like 38 people living in a 3-bedroom house, 3-bedroom apartment in the Bronx,
like 30.
right? That's very Hispanic of you. Bunch of people in one place.
I'm gonna say that. I'm gonna say this. At the time, it didn't feel crowded because that was what I was used to.
Yeah.
It just felt like, hey, out of floor.
But now,
That's good.
but now, you know, you're talking about let the wine breathe. Right? Now your discourse has changed, your lifestyle has changed. So you made it. You're an example of that if people work hard enough that they can make it.
Yes.
So how especially
That's the story.
that's the
told
narrative.
about me.
That's the narrative that is perpetuated, right? So
And you only need one example.
so how do but my question is how does the one exist?
How does the one example?
How does that one continue to exist in the midst of such
Okay, so
horrible
this
oppression?
is the
right?
difference between a. Let me just answer intellectually and then more personally. I consider myself a sociologist. Like I am sociologically minded. So I look at general patterns of things, right? So I'm not. There's always a specific example of a person who doesn't match whatever. But the point is that if it repeats over time, systemic, again, then you're looking at then it's not interesting to talk about those specific examples of the opposite. That's not interesting to me as someone who studies this issue sociologically speaking.
Keep talking.
Now I'm
Keep going.
I feel like
it's not interesting to me as a sociologist example.
now I'm by myself and I'm like, okay. So sociologically speaking, that's how I'm talking, right? So I don't. Yes, there are specific examples. Like there are, for example, like to talk about gender, like how in order to have gender oppression or gender the sexism or patriarchy, you have to have women consent to it because they're half the population and the one that is going to be marginalized. So women have to agree to police gender patterns, right? And I'm not saying that all women do, but it has to be repeated over time. But there's always the one woman who says whatever. Now, so if that one woman becomes 2 and 3 and 4, then change happens. But for the point is
disrupt
that
the system,
so it's a
yeah.
sociological speaking. So I can talk about why I'm a myth sociologically. Why, but I'm a reality too. I'm an embodied blood.
You have
and
materiality to you.
I do have blood and a body.
The blood comes from the
May
wine.
not be as tall, as buff as I hoped for, but I do have a body. I have blood and capillaries and other body things, noises. Right now I'm hungry, so my stomach is growling. So all that stuff, I have all that stuff, but
Just drink
so
more
for
wine.
me,
yeah.
when I thought about myself sociologically, I started to think about why it was me and not my friends or whatever, and I realized
Sometimes
how
your siblings,
lucky
right?
I happened to have gotten. Where there was this teacher that said, you don't belong here. Let me talk to you. Let me have you talk to someone else who can give you these battery of tests. Let me show you how to think about these battery of tests. Let me show you how to do well on these batteries tests. So then I tested out and then went to somebody else and then I got scholarships and all that. But I didn't know that. I mean, it's not like I was born like, mommy, daddy,
it wasn't innate. It wasn't innate.
Yeah. Now, I think some people have that, like maybe Trump's kids, that they always knew that when they were babies, they wouldn't be like whatever. But that's not how it for me.
Yeah.
I had to be told that this stuff was happening, that there were people there that could help me, and there were people there that would introduce me to other people. When you think about that, it's like, wow, it was never about me from the start. And yes, I took the chance, right? I did do the thing. So it's not like there's no agency, but agency is secondary to the
agency is kind
entire
of the ability,
social support,
the choice to have something. Yeah.
To the knowing that this stuff is going on, to the ability of my parents, because it was just my mom, to be able to say, go ahead, go ahead, I support you, you're not a bad person. And and when you think about that, it doesn't, I could only be successful because I was given the opportunities to be successful. And this is why I think systemic patterns happen, because people are just never in doubt that they're not going to have support.
I love one. Absolutely, and it's a tough question to answer too, right?
Yeah.
I love one struggle. They just said meritocracy is a capitalist lie. I love one struggle. And it says I want to meet you as well.
Who?
One struggle, the organization on campus. I'll set it up. I got it. I'll set it up.
Very interested in one struggle. So is Dan. Dan would be very interested in one struggle.
I introduced him to one of the people already. So yeah. Miss AKA said that Hurston needs to get snacks to go with the wine.
I'm saying.
Feel free to sponsor.
Like
what Wednesdays?
This is so un-Latin. When you go into a Latin home, the first thing you do is you make someone fat.
Excuse you. This is very Latin. The first thing I offered was alcohol. Thank you.
Okay, so that part of Latinism is true. So he has a half Latin side and a half not.
Hurston makes good points sometimes. That's
true. The first thing you do is
I make good points sometimes.
By the way, abuse of alcohol is a danger for the world.
Cheers to that. Absolutely.
No, there are people with issues that
That's another show, Dr. Bias. Dr. Bias, we're trying to hang out right
now. I came from a father who used alcohol and was clearly didn't know how to handle the use of alcohol, so he was very abusive. So I do want to say that I have to always say that. But I also want to say that, God damn it, this fucking tastes good. And I got to admit to that.
So let's talk about alcohol a little bit.
So we're talking about poverty.
Yeah, because I remember one time we were in class and Dr. Bias was talking about scotch. And I was like, Dr. Bias, I'm like, yeah. And I remember him telling him, I'm like, yeah, but you get to try that scotch. No one else gets to try that scotch. So if you ever have me as a student, I'm a very argumentative person, right? So I like to go out, I like to ask my professors difficult questions. So I told Dr. Bias this. I'm like, yeah, Dr. Bias, you get to have good scotch. No one else gets to have it. And then Dr. Bias hit me with the, well, Hurston. So Dr. Bias does this too. When Dr. Bias is serious, he'll cry his leg. Well, Hurston, there's nothing wrong with good scotch. I just believe that everyone
should have a good scotch.
And I was like, fuck, that's a good point. So could you kind of elaborate a little bit on that?
I think we have gotten to a world in which we believe that only certain people are entitled to certain things. So case in point, we got into this, in my classes, especially my undergraduate classes and maybe my master's class, I bring up the argument about can poor people be happy? Can poor people be happy? And again,
I remember that. Yeah.
Preface and warning or caveat, I look at these issues sociologically, right?
Real quick, do you think because you've been poor, you can speak about this with more assertiveness?
Well, I also believe and I want to believe that people can be hurt. There are people who don't believe that people can be hurt. I don't believe I think we're readers. There's a lot of stuff out there that suggests that this is happening. I don't know why anybody's doubting this. Unless you don't want to believe that people can be hurt and people can be exploited. If you don't believe that, then there's nothing I can do to ever change your mind. So it's not even about me being. I don't need to experience having been poor. I know some people who are wealthy who understand this fucking issue. I don't, because they know how to read and they want to believe that somebody can be exploited. I just don't think that. I just don't believe this argument that only poor people can understand poor people. If you believe that people can be exploited and are hurt and can suffer, I don't think you need to experience that personally to know that somebody's in pain. Everyone has experienced pain in some way. I don't buy that argument. I don't believe that argument. All right. So
that Armenian.
I forgot what we were talking
about. That Armenian. Yeah. No.
What was the question you asked me?
I'll be honest.
So
I forgot.
All right. Well, I had such a good answer.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, it was a good question.
I believe that you can know that someone has experience because you believe that they're telling you the truth, and that they can explain an experience to you, and you believe that it could be possible. You believe that someone could be hurt. If you believe that it's possible that someone could be hurt, then you can accept their experience of being hurt. I don't understand this argument that you can't know something that you haven't experienced.
Now, here's a question for you. So, people tend to conflate race and poverty, right? So,
well, they are related to each other.
I'm not saying they're not. I'm saying conflate. They tend to make these things a one-issue thing. Your president, Trump, was saying that, you know what?
I want to say that I did not vote for Trump.
Well, clearly you did. So, your president...
vote mattered.
Trump was saying that, blacks clearly are just the poor ones, He's had this type of rhetoric in addition to other type of just discourses. But people tend to believe this, right?
And yet, the Bert Kavanaugh, not Bert.
Oh, Kavanaugh, your Supreme Court
not
nominee?
Bert. Brian Kavanaugh.
Brett
Kavanaugh.
Brett.
I don't know if you saw him testifying. Who was behind them? Condoleezza Rice. It was a magnificent image.
Can you break that down a little bit for us? Okay.
Brett Kavanaugh was testifying. Condoleezza was right behind him. What does that tell you?
But not everyone knows who Condoleezza Rice is.
Okay, Condoleezza Rice is this black woman who's, I think she's now the provost of Stanford or something like that. Or she was the provost of Stanford. And she went to the Bush administration.
Yeah.
And then the second Bush administration. And then she, and Brett Kavanaugh he's embedded in he's this whole Republican operative political guy justifying torture and then lying about it. And then this guy is and now we know he's, I have no doubt that the accusations against him are correct, given his own yearbook.
Yeah. High school yearbook.
Yeah. I mean, clearly this guy was this guy is a
Dr. Biden, we have a lot of questions real quick.
But the point is that Condoleezza was right behind him, so it's not about black and white at some point. Entirely. She qualifies as black by a racial category. And so it begs the question about what we think we're saying when we use the word black Americans, whatever, because she is clearly a black American.
I like this point. I like this point. This is a good point you made tonight.
And the more that, and there's some evidence that shows that the more African Americans, we use the word black to mean African American in the U.S. Obviously, and in Miami, that is entirely a wrong category to assume, a wrong thing to assume. But the point is, generally in America, when we talk about black people, we talk about African Americans, and the Condoleezza Rice would qualify as Clarence Thomas qualifies as a black person, and so she's sitting there in support of Brett Kavanaugh after some of the stuff is out there about him, and she's a woman too. It just completely makes us think that there's something larger than these categories at work. And
I like this point. It's a good point that you're making, Dr. Rice. I was waiting for you to make a good point. I've been waiting for it, and thank you.
It's because I really have to go to the bathroom. So
it took you.
All right. So
all right. So real quick, we're almost out of time.
Okay.
All right. So my brother Eric Feldman,
Eric.
E. Feld.
Hey, Eric.
E. Feld's in the house.
I love Eric.
Says I say I go through life trying not to think I know more about someone else's life than they do. So I agree with Dr. Baez strongly on this point.
Okay, so I believe I don't know more about your life than you do. But I believe that you could be wrong about what you believe about yourself. And not wrong, but under an understanding that from another perspective can lead you to a different understanding. That does not mean that I cannot understand your experience if I believe that you could have an experience. If I believe that you are entitled to have an experience and that experiences matter in the world as evidence of truth, then I believe that you could have an experience of having been discriminated against, having felt this, having felt harassed, having felt touched by a fucking asshole man. I believe that if you say that, because I believe your experience, that you can have an experience, then I believe that you can have an experience that is different from mine. I just don't understand this argument about not understanding this issue. You don't understand because you don't want to understand. We are literate people. Well,
about 50, maybe like 47%.
Yeah, I want to take back what I said. We can be literate people.
Yeah. So real quick, when people say, "Hey, you don't get what I'm going through because you're not a Hispanic man, like you're not Latino, so you don't get it."
I think you're arguing against the point they're making. And if I'm not Hispanic, so Dan Saunders is like
he's a professor in our program. Yeah.
White Jewish guy from racist Lowell,
New England. He's from New England.
Or somewhere in Massachusetts, hell. And he talks about. So he'll say something, and I'm like, okay, let me say something to you. He's like, oh, okay. So one of the things is like sometimes you don't get it, but because he wants to believe that you're telling that you're an honest person, he then understands. He may not know what it's like to have been a black person being arrested for just being a black person, but he understands that it happens.
Yeah.
And that it could happen, and I think so when we're saying you don't get it, but you don't get it, we're actually arguing that they're not getting the point we're making.
So Dr. Bowser, we're running out of time. We have about 12 minutes left, and Justin, the good old Justin Taylor.
Hey Justin.
First year doc student in our program, brought us back to the point asking. He was saying that you were referencing to earlier that the question, can poor people be happy?
Yes.
And then he said we kind of got derailed off that, which he's right. So let's go back to that real quick. And I want to ask y'all: Do y'all think poor people can be happy?
Because I was going to say,
please feel free to answer freely. Do you all believe that poor people can be happy?
Because I will argue that they cannot be happy.
Dr. Byers, you have to let me let it drop, and then you wait a little bit, like 5 seconds.
I don't have to let anything happen.
This is called showmanship.
If I am the guest,
this is
I
called
feel like
Dr. Byers. This is called showmanship.
I was given a false contract here.
He was given no contracts. This is called the only contract I gave him was a bottle of wine. Listen, this is called showmanship.
Much of the world's contracts are oral contracts.
That's fine.
Back off. You don't even know the legal law. I'm a lawyer. I know this shit.
Dr. Byers, you haven't practiced law in like 48 years. Listen. I'm failing my class. For sure failing my class.
Oh, you're not failing the class. You're just failing this experience, whatever this fucking thing is. All right.
It's called Woke Wednesdays. All right, so can poor people be happy?
No.
Why not?
Because the definitions of happiness in the U.S. as a nation state, it's defined. The U.S. defines happiness by material things.
Doesn't the rest of the world define that way?
No. Well, I don't know about other countries other than the Western nations. And so one of the things is we define ourselves by what we own and what we control. Capitalists own things. We live in a world of owning things. And so if you don't own a home, you are considered you're not considered fully a citizen. If you don't own the means of your own subsistence, to be happy presupposes a certain level of standard of living that after which you can start thinking of a psychological state called happiness. So if you are unhealthy, like sick, dying of cancer or whatever, if you don't have an ability to know where your next meal is coming from, if your physicality is all that is in your mind and in your existence, you cannot think of a mental state called happiness. If all your world is entirely consumed by your own physicality, by your own hunger,
Solipsism?
unhealthiness, and by unhealthiness I don't mean in a mental state, but like being physically sick, your own hunger, your own stress of not having a shelter during the cold or the warmth or whatever, you cannot think of happiness. Happiness is a higher level thing to think about. And so I believe to assume poorness is to assume a person that doesn't exist. To assume that poor person is happy is to assume someone who doesn't exist, someone who has had their basic needs met, and now they can think of themselves as some kind of immense person that can think about what they wish and what they dream about and whatever. But if any of you have been hungry for more than haven't been eating for more than a couple of days, you know that's your body is all you can think about. You're not thinking about your happiness, about your future. You're just thinking about when your next meal is coming from. And that is the point I'm making. That we have this dream about a poor person being able to be happy because they can, and it's all premised on the idea that this is a subjective phenomenon. You're poor only because you want to be.
Yeah.
Because you don't have the skills to be unpoor. And that, so I guess I mean it. I guess I want to make that argument that I'm looking at sociologically speaking.
When you say that, sociologically speaking.
Well, I'm looking at I don't look at it as a psychological. I don't look at things psychologically. I don't look at things like more systemic patterns of things, like more like reproducible patterns of things. If you are, but even think. I'm asking you to think of yourself in a very your bodies right now. If you are thirsty, what are you thinking about? Water. If you are hungry, what are you thinking about? You're relieving the physicalness of your hunger. And so if you're a person who cannot have those needs met, I don't know how you can think about something like happiness. Happiness is thought about. It is made conscious. You can say you're happy because you have made your experience conscious.
So
I don't know if I'm making any sense. I just want to say
so I have a question.
There's a physicality to being poor that cannot be denied.
To Dr. Barker, I have a question.
Yeah.
Someone's saying, as a system, it's not a choice, but as an individual, you have a choice to change that.
I don't know what that means. You mean like
as a system, it's not.
So
a choice.
I could choose to not be poor tomorrow, if I was poor today.
I'm guessing. As a system, it's not a choice, but as an individual, it is a choice.
I think we do have opportunities if we're given them that we can say yes or no, right? I mean, let's say you are offered, you have no home right now, you don't have a shelter, and you don't have a shelter, not about a home, because a home is an entirely different connotation. But let's say you don't have a shelter, and you can choose to go to a government-sponsored shelter, or you can choose to live under a bridge. Is that a real choice? Is that a real choice?
In a way, you're also asking people to think and analyze beyond the normal, right? We tend to be fed certain narratives, and we tend to believe these narratives based on certain presuppositions and assumptions, right? And I'm a person who's very grateful, and also an example of what happens when someone who's not used to these narratives comes into a place and starts reading and analyzing these things more critically, and that changes a person.
Yeah.
Right. So in that in itself, like, it is a privilege for me to even.
So
speak,
that's why,
right?
person, you're no longer poor. Because you now have the ability to think beyond your own body. And I think, I believe in I think it's Maslow or Pavlov, I forget which one is.
Maslow hierarchy of needs,
Yeah, Maslow, but I don't know, maybe Pavlov, I don't know, one of them did dogs and one of them.
I had a cousin named Pablo once.
No, every person has a cousin named Pablo.
Yeah.
I have a cousin named Pablo. Even Almi Rodriguez.
Shout out to Almi.
But Almi's in the house.
Yeah.
I hope she's not on there because she would be horrified to be here. But the point is, Pavlov, Maslow is who I think I mean when he says that we first have to meet these basic needs of health and eating and whatever, before we can think of higher order needs, like the need to be happy, the need to be satisfied, the need to be respected, those kind of higher order needs. I think he's a psychologist, so I hate to say psychologist. I tend to be suspicious of psychologists, but I think he's onto something. That I think he has. That there's only ability to think of something after you've had certain conditions met, and I believe that is to be true. And I haven't found a contrary example of someone who's in the streets. They may say they're happy, but if they're hungry, I'm sorry, that's all you can think about.
And I think this is where, and we're kind of trying to tie out the show right now. Tie out the show where you're making a stark difference, or you're drawing a line
between an economic condition of being unable to subsist, and the state of like the more cultural state of like, well, if I would be able to, I'd be more willing to blame somebody for their condition if everybody had a living wage, if everybody had an actual equal opportunity, that wasn't defined by their race or their gender or their sexuality,
able-bodied,
or how they talk, or their accent, or whatever.
And I think that's
why did you choose that way?
And I think that's a great way to kind of conclude it, right? Yeah. Because this is what we're saying, that there's not an equal playing field.
No.
This doesn't exist. This is an imaginary.
If you believe that, you should be voting for Brett Kavanaugh.
But we live in a democracy.
Yeah.
Where this is where we're fed, right? That it's an American dream.
Well, it's not because it's democracy. It's because this is a logic in Western thought that somehow I think, therefore I am. It's this is a wrong philosophical.
And I love the point you made earlier about how you were granted opportunities, right? You were a lucky kid. And sometimes we can't account for that, right? Luck.
Yeah. I believe everybody's lucky. You're lucky to have been born to be rich. If you are Gates, you were born to Bill and Melinda Gates, you're fucking lucky. It's not like you said like, I'm gonna choose that parent. You know.
Yeah.
That's not how that works. We're all lucky if you think about it that way. We can understand everything as a series of lucks that are available to some people but not to others.
Yeah. Well, so we're out of time.
Hey everybody, thank you. I just want to thank the Academy.
Oh my God. Dun 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 dun. This is the music starts playing.
That's graduation. Oh,
yeah, we're graduating out of Woke Wednesdays.
It was fun. Thank you.
Yeah. So look, Dr. Baez, clearly brilliant man. So a lot of his research, his second degree was was Juris Doctorate. He was practicing law.
What do you mean my first graduate degree?
Your first graduate degree, your second degree.
Yes,
right?
Was a Juris Doctorate.
And as part of his specialization, research focus, what she's trying to get me to do, I'm gonna get on that. Was around law and affirmative action. A lot of your work is around affirmative action, and a lot of people have been asking for a show on affirmative action. So I think this is the last show we'll bring Dr. Baez on, because after that, seriously, what else does he have to contribute to Woke Wednesdays? So
I have some good ideas about what a good wine is.
And you know what? We might have a show on that too. But yeah, so definitely people are saying bring Dr. Baez back. We're definitely gonna have Dr. Baez back. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. People are saying great show. You're getting lots of love and hearts and stuff. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you learned something. Please feel free to DM me. That means direct message. Send me a message. I will email you or send you the articles.
I don't even know what direct message means.
So
DM means direct message.
So you
have to know what direct message is to understand what DM is.
They'll send you a telegraph, Dr. Baez.
Oh.
Yeah.
Like pigeons?
Yeah, they might do that.
They
might call you on their car phone. But y'all, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Dr. Baez, seriously. Thank you so much for bringing your brilliance on the show and just being here. Y'all take care. Have a good night. We'll see y'all next week. Next week we're talking about the show Insecure. It's a very popular show right now amongst millennials, talking about masculinity, blackness, LGBTQ, male vulnerability, dating. Next week's going to be amazing. Y'all feel free to